Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we are continuing in our open beta series by looking at the Protoss Sentry. Now you can actually already order these because pre-order has already gone live. It's been up for a while, so assuming that they haven't hit their maximum capacity at their factory and facility for production by the end of April and into May, you can still pick these up, which is pretty great. I also suspect this is not going to be one of the more commonly purchased. So even if they hit capacity on other things, they might not hit capacity on this one because it's a support unit that was not present in StarCraft 1. It was present in StarCraft 2. It was not as much of a crowd favorite as things like the Stalker or the Zealot or various different types of Templar. So as a gateway unit, it was kind of marginal. And there were quite a few people who could build armies using maybe one or two of these for a 200 population limit, you know, uh, without having to go too much deeper than that. You really didn't need more than one or two. With Legacy of the Void, they kind of gained some extra power because they had the ability to do shield recharging, uh, mostly because we lost the shield battery. So, because of that, like it was like a whole thing of potentially going the shield regeneration route. And there were certain missions that were tied to kind of the critical nature of sentries. But in general, they weren't that common, and yet they are a very interesting unit. And when I heard that every nation was getting one support unit, I was like, oh, so it's probably going to be the Sentry. And actually, quite interested in what all's going on here. Now, it is worth noting before we begin this, if you look at the change log in open beta for Protoss units, what you will discover is that I kid you not, a plurality, the majority of the unit changes that have happened, especially at the very beginning, were all around the Sentry. I kid you not. This thing varied dramatically in a lot of different things. Like the only things that stayed true and didn't change was how force fields worked. I kid you not. Everything else was adjusted as time went by. So just realize from a changelog perspective, the Sentry has actually undergone a lot of changes, more so I think than any other Protoss unit, except maybe the Zealot. And so, as we prepare to jump into the Sentry, just know that as of my recording of this, I think this is roughly where it's landed, but who can say? Okay. And so we're going to be looking at what the stats are, what special abilities are for sentries. We're then going to look at offensively how to how to utilize it and maximize its abilities, defensively how to utilize it best, and then we're going to be looking at what kind of role it's going to fill, so that way you can utilize it most efficiently alongside the rest of your units. I mean, I suppose one could try to do a an army that is predominantly Sentry, though realize that since it's a support unit and support slots in your army are relatively expensive from a Vespene gas perspective, I don't think you could do a 100% Sentry list, but you could do quite a few depending on how you want to run it. We're going to look to see whether or not it lines up with the RTS game that we all know. And then, of course, answering the all-important question, since pre-orders are still going, should you buy some? And so to start off with, there's a couple things we noticed. First of all, again, they have a shield value. Shields are really nice because it's 2 extra hit points before you have to start removing the hit points of the rest of the unit. Keep in mind, it is not 2 hit shields per model. It is 2 shields total for the units that are in the squad. Now, this follows along generally with the way that shields tend to work so far for a lot of the Protoss, non-hero units, which is that it's roughly 1 shield point generated per model that's in the squad. Okay, as a general rule, that's how they tend to work. With the speed of 4 to 7, 7 when it's down to 1 model, 4 when there's still 2. This is standard speed, relatively on par with a lot of other stuff that's currently in the game. The evade value of a 6 plus kind of makes sense because, again, it's not particularly fast. Also, just in general, Protoss tend to not have particularly good evasion saves. More on that a little bit later. It's got a 5 plus armor, which is kind of your stock standard basic armor save. You have to be bulkier and beefier than certainly a Sentry in order to get above a 5 plus. But most things in the game so far have a 5 plus for their save. Hit points are set at 4. Again, pretty standard for most, units that have 3 or so models, 2 to 3 models within their unit. And with a size of 1, that actually makes them shorter than a Marine, makes them shorter than most things actually in the game. It's on par with a Zergling, and those are the only things that are currently at size 1. So in that sense, they might ironically have some problems seeing things over certain walls. But just in general, like they're it also means hey, they're pretty close to the ground. Not a whole lot of bonuses for that in this game, but it is something that you could potentially work around. When you see that it's worth 1 supply, as long as you have both of the models. When you drop down to 1 model, or obviously less, then it's worth 0. Okay, because it'll be removed if it's less than that. And at 120 points, it's a pretty low level to be, for you to field. It's not particularly expensive, even with the upgrades. Not particularly expensive, though it is a slightly higher starting cost than the Terran Medic, and a slightly lower cost than the Zerg Queen. All of them roughly end up, depending on the upgrades that you get, at around the same place. The medics can be a little more expensive, but because of the fact that you can now remove the need for them to count a supply when they're on the table, which is kind of cool, against your supply maximum. And we have a couple of abilities. So first of all, in any phase, we have the restoration ability. We saw this on the medics, where you can basically when a friendly unit, which it doesn't say another friendly unit, so it could even be the sentry itself, within 4 inches receives a debuff, then you remove all the debuffs from it. Now, similar to things like the medic and the queen, this is a great ability. I suspect that we're going to get even more use out of this as time goes by, seeing as we're getting things like the Defiler is going to have negative effects and abilities. Potentially High Templar trying to sap people's energy if that becomes a thing. I don't know if that'll just be like they cannot use active abilities on a given turn or something like that. But however that works out, I think we're going to see more and more debuffs as time goes by. So pretty useful. And the fact that you can trigger it at any time is really good. But more on that a little bit later because there is a trick to how this works. You then got Force Field. In the movement phase, you can choose to, at only the cost of 1 psionic energy, which is not bad. You can place a force field token within 8 inches in an unoccupied space. And these tokens are actually pretty large, all things considered, or at least, by comparison to things like zealots and sentries and stuff. I think it's on a 50 millimeter base. We'll soon see when everything's down. All that we need to know here is that units of size 1 or 2 cannot move across force fields unless they obviously have the flying keyword, in which case they totally can. And models that are size 3 or more can move over it, and then it's removed, okay, after they cross over it. Which at present, the only size 3 model we have is the Goliath and the Queen. Those are the only 2 we have so far. Currently, the Stalker maybe. Stalker might be size 3 as well. But the point is that it's a relatively small cadre here at the beginning. There are going to be a whole lot more of these as time goes by, obviously. But it means that if you want to hedge out Zerglings, Zealots, actually a lot of the, relatively easily spammable melee units in the game can be stopped with this. Not everything, because I'm pretty sure that the Raptor ability to move over things cancels this. I'm pretty sure. Because they wouldn't be moving across, they'd be moving over. But I'm not entirely sure. I guess we'll soon find out. But my guess is, by a reading of it, that the Raptor Zergling would still be able to move across the force field. So just FYI, be careful. But it is at least one option for kind of zoning things off, especially if you can catch people in choke point where they have to move between, solid pieces of terrain that they're not allowed to move over. That'd be pretty sweet. You've then got Guardian Shield, where all hit rolls made during ranged attacks targeting a friendly unit within 4 inches are made with 1 fewer die in total. Now, this is one of those abilities that can be really useful because, if you're fighting like a single roach who only gets like 3 attacks, cutting his attacks down by 33%, and then allowing him to then be down to 2 attacks, and then he's still got to roll his 3+ in order to hit, means you could take him down from 2 damage to 1 damage, and with surges being what they are, that's actually a pretty substantial thing. So it's not bad. That being said, if you're going up against a full Marine squad, and the full Marine squad's rolling 18 dice, dropping them from 18 to 17 actually is not that much, right? So, realize that there's going to be a scaling level of value that you're going to get out of this, but it's not a, it's something that could be really good, but it may not necessarily make a big impact on your game, depending on what it is that you're fighting. In the assault phase, it only has one ability, which is its attack. It gets the disruption beam. This is a consistent, steady beam that attaches between itself and another unit. And so you'll notice it has a range of 8, relatively short, but, on par with things like the Roach. It can target either air or ground, which at present doesn't make a big difference. but it's about to in a couple waves. So, we will be seeing some flyers even as early as wave 2 with the support units that are coming in, which is kind of nice. It gets 2 attacks on a 2 plus, which for a core, non-hero style unit, this is a support unit, but on something that's a non-hero unit, a 2 plus is really good, right? You don't get any surge results on this, and there's no upgrades that give you a surge result on this. So, they'll get full armor saves and such against it. So there's that. It only does 1 damage, so it's not like it's doing a lot of damage, but it does have the instant keyword, and we'll talk about that more a little bit later. And then the final part, you'll notice that there's a little bit of an overhaul. There's an additional thing I threw on there. This was actually updated during the week between when I pulled this card and when it got its next changed. So I've since updated with the thing that's most accurate, which is now that the beam in close combat is different from the beam in the assault phase. They used to be the same, but now you'll notice that obviously it's range engage. It can only target ground because, again, you can only be engaged with ground units. It still gets the 2 attacks, but now it hits on a 3 plus, and it doesn't have the instant keyword. Okay? That is important because it does mitigate some of the things you can do with this beam. But all things considered, from an attack perspective, again, this is not the greatest thing ever, but it's not the worst either that we've seen. And then in terms of upgrades, we've got a couple things going on here. So first of all, you can get solid field projectors, where basically you get to perform the same action that you had before, but you can perform it a second time. The way that this game works is that you can technically perform each of your abilities in each phase once, unless, one, the triggers are meant regularly for things like reactions. So I guess technically speaking, you can trigger more than, you can only trigger 1 reaction per activation, but it's not per round, right? So because of that, you could technically trigger those anytime you want. But in this particular case, it means that you could set up your first force field token using your force fields special rule. And then you could trigger solid field projectors to put out a second one, right? Which again, we're very familiar with. This is very common even as early as, our first time fighting the protest, probably in the smash and grab mission in Wings of Liberty. Very, very commonly used. When people are playing on the ladder, where they'll take like just a couple of sentries together and they'll throw a couple of these force projectors down. In this case, a squad of 2 can produce 2 force fields in the same turn if you wanted to. And it only costs you 20 points to do that, which is not bad. I don't want to say you should always take that because there are going to be some armies where this isn't going to make a dramatic difference against them. But if you think you're going to face some melee stuff, especially with the smaller variety, enemy zealots, enemy zerglings, things like that, it might be advantageous to be able to take these things. There are also other advantages, which we'll talk about later when we get to the defensive phase. And then when we look at the assault phase, you have the ability to cast hallucination as a reaction. Now note, this, because it's a reaction, you can technically do this as many times as you want in a given turn. And it looks like it's a reaction that has a 0 psychic energy cost. It's kind of interesting. But basically, when an enemy declares a ranged attack against a friendly unit within 4 inches, the friendly unit can make an evade roll. So they can use their evade save and their armor save, which is nice. You might tell yourself, oh, that's broken, that's overpowered. First of all, from experience, having fielded these, first of all, because it's Protoss, you don't have that many units, let alone how many units are going to be within range of a sentry if you have to be at more than one place on the map. Okay. Ironically, this ability might actually be more powerful in skirmish, played at 1,000 points or lower, than it is at standard level of 2,000 points, between 1,000 and 2,000 points. Simple reason being because you have less objectives on a smaller board. So there's a better chance you're catching more of your army within 4 inches of your sentry unit. So even if you only have 1 sentry unit compared to 2, you might actually have more units within range because you don't have to be in 2, 3, 4, or even more places on the map, which is kind of nice. The second reason why I don't think this is particularly overpowered is because as a general rule, so far at least, Protoss evade saves suck. The number of units that get a 6+ save, maybe a 5+ save, is extremely rare. There are not many good saves. We don't have any 4+ evade saves like you can get with, for example, the Zergling. All right. So, if they were getting really good saves, that would be one thing. They really don't. Okay. And so because of that, I personally don't have a problem with this being a 0 psionic energy reaction. It's only 2 models, so being able to actually have a reasonable range band that you can extend this reaction to is actually relatively difficult to do. You're not really giving that much extra defense. You're cutting out a 1/6, maybe a 1/3 of the total hits with this, it's really not that much, all things considered. You're talking about blocking 1 or 2 wounds, and if they're using this over and against something else, like some of the other cards that they have, that might actually be advantageous for you because again, a 6+ save and a 5+ save are extremely janky. Sometimes they roll close to the average. Sometimes they really don't. So because of that, I don't personally have a problem with it. Now, when we look at the offensive abilities, in the movement phase, they don't really have any, right? I mean, other than obviously moving into range for the ability to shoot at the enemy, right? They don't even have like any negative debuffs that they can apply to the enemy, like, for example, the medics do. In the assault phase, it's minimal, but it is actually surprisingly effective. The disruption beam has, of course, the 2 attacks on a 2+, but it has the instant keyword, which means not only are you likely to get 2 hits in, because you just need to not roll a 1 on either of those dice, but in addition, it means you can't use a reaction against it. And all of the ways we have so far, whether it's on a tactical card or whether it's a unit special ability, in order to block wounds going into somebody is done using a reaction. Which means that the opponent still gets, obviously, they get their armor save. It's possible if they're a burrowed Zerg or something like that, they might even get an evade save against whatever it is that you're doing. But if you slip any of those wounds through, it's an instant. Those wounds are going through, right? Like, unless they have innately the tough 1 keyword or something like that, you are going to slip wounds past the enemy. And so, toward that end, this could be a really cheeky way of dealing with units that have a good number of wounds on them and you just want to make those wounds count. So, for example, if you're going up against a Marine squad, right? And they've stim packed, and so they've taken on a couple of non-lethal wounds. And let's say that you have a stalker unit that's also within range of them. You can fire with the stalker unit. The problem is that the medics might block a bunch of that damage coming in. And if that's the case, you might not actually do any wounds to the target. And if that's the case, then you might discover that you don't cause those 2 non-lethal wounds to actually become wounds dealt to the unit. And the unit's going to be firing at you with full force and precision 3. Whereas, even though they only get 2 attacks, which is a lot less than a stalker gets, you might consider attacking with this. Because you'll roll your 2 attacks. On a 2+, there's a good chance you snap 2 of them through. They get a 5+ armor save, which might block 1, but probably not 2. And then they can't block it with healing, right? Because it's an instant. And so they suffer the 1, but then they also have to then also suffer the non-lethal wounds too. So they end up losing a model, right? And if you can slip both of these wounds through, which on a 5+ save is actually, it's very possible, right? I mean, because it's less than a 50-50 chance they're going to get 1. Well, if that's the case, you slip 2 wounds through, plus the additional 2 wounds from their non-lethal wounds, that's 2 models gone, right? And now they're hitting with an awful lot less. Now, obviously, 7 Marines, especially shooting at a Sentry unit, is not going to be great. More on that a little bit later. But suffice it to say for now, that might actually be more reliable, ironically, than the Stalkers. So something just worth thinking about. I still feel like the best way probably to proc those non-lethal wounds is probably just charging them with Zealots and then doing a ton of impact hits, and then they don't save all the impact hits, and then you get all the impact hits, and then you do that stuff. But if you happen to not have Zealots around, or whatever, this could be one way to be able to pop some of those. Quite similarly, if you have, a bigger unit that you've been working down, and you're looking to do the coup de grace, you could throw shots from, say, Stalkers against it, or shots from Adepts at it, or something like that. Or if it's only 1 or 2 wounds, you could try your luck with one of these. You might pop it, and then you can throw all of that extra firepower at another unit, and you're not wasting all the wounds that you would be doing, because I don't think any of those things, I don't think Adepts or Stalkers can split fire. So, just things to think about. And then finally, they are also most effective against models that are, again, kind of down to that 1 wound because of the instant. Again, I don't want to oversell this. You are going to do 1, maybe 2 wounds, right? Because even if you have 2 models, so you get the rate of attacks 2 twice, so you have like 4 attacks, like, there are enough shenanigans that people have that, and I've seen some pretty incredible armor saves in my time. You might slip 1, maybe 2 through. Okay, I don't want to make you think that you're going to get much more than that in there. but you might be able to pull off some pretty interesting snipes with these guys just purely because of the mechanic of being a 2+ to hit with instant. Okay. In the combat phase, they're pretty bad, right? I mean, you get 2 attacks, 3+ damage, one, and then they lost the instant, right? So you are likely to hit. Again, how many hits are you actually going to get past their armor saves? I don't know, one or two, probably. So I wouldn't anticipate this doing much, and especially if you're going up against something that's built for melee, like a Zergling unit or a Zealot unit, I really would not anticipate them doing very much for you. Okay, but that is at least an option. So definitely treat this like it is not an offensive unit. Okay, it is a defensive and supporting unit. It is not actually built well to attack. Now, that being said, defensively, this is a phenomenal unit. Okay, first of all, just in any phase, you can do debuff removal, right? Here's the trick. There are ways to maximize the amount of benefits you get off of this, but there's also a way that this can become a sinkhole for you. Because again, you have to spend 1 psionic energy every single time you do this, which means, let's say you're fighting against a Zerg unit. You got a bunch of Zerg nearby. There's a group of Zealots that you have, and they have a group of, say, like 3 Vile Roaches. And you've got yourself I don't know, say you've got yourself a Zealot squad or an Immortal or Stalker, right? Or something like that. They're going to shoot their vile spews at you. And each time that they hit you, they're going to be inflicting a penalty to, I believe it's your rate of attacks. Okay? Which is really bad. The first time it comes in, you can choose to use Restoration to remove it. The problem is that the next time the next one comes in, it's back again. And you can technically spend a reaction on that turn as long as you didn't do a reaction in order to prevent damage or anything else like that. You could do a reaction to use Restoration in order to remove the effect. But now you're paying a second psionic energy, and then they could try hitting you a third time, and you'd have to spend a third one in order to maintain what you have. And there comes a point where you have to question, how many tactical card abilities am I giving up? How many other abilities later on am I giving up in order to gain the benefits of avoiding this penalty, right? Especially since I'm pretty sure the penalties in this game, much like the buffs, do not stack. So, you're talking about, it's not like they can stack with -1, -2, -3, right? So, just be thinking about it. Second, and more than that, because of the fact that this is a reaction and you're only allowed to use one reaction on any activation, you get into this weird catch-22 when, for example, and this is the reason why I use the Vile Roach, the Vile Roach could be doing substantial damage to a unit, especially if they're attacking, say, like a group of Zealots, where they can surge against light targets for a D3+1, assuming that you take the Hydriotic Bile, which, by the way, you should always take on every single Roach ever. Okay, we talked about this in the Roach video. Literally, it's like 10 points to get a good surge result. You should be taking that every single time. But the result is, and this is the key part behind it, if you want to block some of the damage, that's a reaction. And if you're spending that reaction, you can't use Restoration, which means you're going to have the debuff penalty because it's not an action. It's not an active ability. It's only a reaction. You can only do it when a unit is suffering a debuff. So they'd have to suffer a second debuff. And again, they don't stack. So it's not like your opponent's probably going to be casting multiple times with Vile Roaches trying to apply the same debuff. It's not going to happen, right? Unless you're removing it already. So, just keep in mind that it is a nice ability. I think it's much nicer against things like the Medic Flare ability, where you kind of need the unit to be able to shoot and actually hit things. You don't want to have that penalty of -6 inches worth of range. You kind of want to save it for something more like that. But it is at least, it is something in the arsenal. Every army, every faction gets access to one, and I'm glad the Sentry gets it for this one because it does add a little bit of extra value. In the movement phase, you are going to be very busy. Okay? You're going to be very busy with this guy because, of course, you have movement. Positioning is super critical for literally everything the Sentry does. It has a short-ranged attack. It has short support and buff abilities. And even the placing of the fields is only within 8 inches, right? So because of that, positioning is going to be very, very important. And the order in which you're moving units so that you have the space and the positioning to set these guys upright is going to matter a lot. You have the force fields, right? One, maybe two of them that you get to place down within 8 inches. Great way of just helping to, again, add to the distance that somebody needs to run. Possibly even blocking off an area entirely, depending on how heavily dense the terrain is in that particular area of the battlefield. Guardian Shield is also an ability that one can do. It makes it so that enemy attacks against allies that are within 4 inches get -1 to their attack dice. Again, it's going to vary in terms of mileage. It's a good ability. Um, be more useful against smaller groups of people or people who don't have quite as many attacks. But it is one way that you can help to mitigate things just off the top. Again, just a form of mitigation, which is kind of nice. In the assault phase, you're pretty much just doing reactions, right? You're doing hallucination in order to help to protect your guys. Keep in mind your mileage is going to vary, but at least at present, it looks like it doesn't have a psionic energy cost, so you might as well pop it every single time. You know, there's no reason not to. And of course, movement's also going to be important, both to set up hallucination to make sure that you're close enough to units that are going to be attacked, because you don't need to be within 4 inches of the enemy, just to be within 4 inches of the unit being attacked. It's also just nice in case you need to strategically redeploy, right? Because like you could throw down these force fields up to 8 inches away and then at the beginning of the assault phase, if you needed to, you could run these guys back. And now you're effectively 12 inches away from where these things were. And so even units that were on the opposite side and thought, well, at least I'll still be able to shoot at the sentries, if they only have a 12-inch range, like all those Marines, stalkers that don't have the benefit from the Twilight Council of that extra buff speed, buff range 4, this could potentially be a really good denial of enemy attacks on a given turn. It all depends on how you use it, though. Okay. And then, obviously, again, the hallucination, I think, is the big thing that's going on here. But don't count out moving as part of your turn. Keep these guys alive because the 4 wounds with the 2 shields on a 5+ and a 6+ saves are not good. You are going to die pretty quickly. So you do need to take care of these guys. And then finally, in the combat phase, honestly, just not really much there, right? Like, you have possible restoration. You don't really, you're not even going to remove too many models. It's not like you can really do a whole lot with these. From a defensive standpoint, you even have difficulty defending yourself, to be completely honest. And so, again, really, really strong defensive unit. It's the kind of thing that's going to help to keep the rest of the army going and keep them moving. And again, on a relatively low budget, you can run this as low as 120 points if you really wanted to. So what role is it filling? Well, obviously, it's debuff clearing, which is really nice, very useful against the medics with their flare, good against vile roaches. It could be really good. Um, it could be really good for stopping marauders who are trying to slow down your zealots, potentially later on your Dark Templar, and stuff like that that want to get into close combat. The reason why I'm not going to necessarily say it's good for that is because the speed -3 that you're getting to your charge distance could just as easily be made up by using the reaction for the charge ability that zealots have to roll 2d6 and take the higher. Because on balance, you're getting at least an extra +2 inches off of that. And you run the math, it's basically, the rolling 2, taking the higher. It's not even a re-roll of it. It's rolling 2 and taking the higher. So there's no risk involved. With that part of it is basically an extra +2 inches is how it works out. So toward that end, it's fine for helping out with that. It could be really useful. I don't know. It all depends. If you want to try it, go for it. But I'm gonna guess it's gonna be relatively comparable. Will you have a sentry nearby? Is really the big question, right? And do you want to spend your resources doing that, or do you want to just roll high and then crush through the enemy? It's very cheap, right? I mean, it's relatively inexpensive. It's actually quite effective, even as low as about 150 points. You don't really need a whole lot off of it. But you can get quite a bit of value out of them for relatively cheap. I mean, you could even run them at their lowest level and you'd be fine. And then finally, you do need to keep them near your allies, but they're really not a frontline unit. So do be careful on positioning. Okay. I cannot overemphasize this enough. If you want to get good value out of sentries, you have to position them effectively. Okay. Because if they get mauled and you even drop down to just the one, not only are they not counting toward supply, so they're not going to help you toward objectives, but more than that, their ability to screen things off goes down quite dramatically. So now the force field upgrade, especially if you purchase the extra one, is not worth very much. Hallucination is not worth as much because you aren't able to clip as many people. Restoration reduces your range by a dramatic amount because you have a lot less footprint to be within 4 inches of people. Everything that these guys do drops dramatically when it drops to only one unit. The only benefit you get is moving 7 inches, right, instead of 4. But even then, your second model was effectively moving 7 inches when you had 2. So just things to think about. And does this match the computer game? I mean, it's a strong support unit, right? With a weak attack, which is true in the game. It is very useful for keeping your forces alive, right? It does need to kind of work in conjunction with the rest of your force. In Legacy of the Void, they had the shield recharge ability, which we don't currently see. So, for the most part, yes, this is a very, very good addition. Obviously, I don't think there was any debuff clearing abilities that, basically any unit had in the game. So, mostly because otherwise, things like fungal growth and stuff like that would just be completely out of the game, which would be kind of sad. Because that's kind of it's a big deal as to why people build infestors. So there's that. But on the whole, yeah, I think it matches up pretty well. And again, from an aesthetics perspective, it looks like the thing from the game, which is awesome. And so finally asking the question, should you buy this? Maybe. And here's the reason why I say this. Depending on the points level you plan to play at lower points levels, you really don't need more than one. And the simple reason why is you do need to be doing damage to the enemy. If you don't do damage to the enemy, you're going to lose, right? So because of that, like you can't spam too many of these and be highly, highly, highly effective. At higher points levels, if you bought the army set, which you should be getting, just the starter army is really good value for the Protoss. It may not be quite as good value as it is for, say, like the Zerg or the Terran, but it is still really good value by comparison to what you're buying here. If you were to buy these kits separately. Uh, if you bought this as part of a greater bundle that included one of everything else, do you need extras? Probably not, because two is pretty good. Even at 2,000 points, it's pretty good. You might consider picking up a third one because, like, it is a good debuff remover, right? Like, and I don't want to poop on that. You kind of need your bonuses and your abilities. You need your value for Protoss because you're paying a lot of points for every unit, right? So, like, you don't get too many models, right? I mean, your largest set of models currently is 4, and I'm not anticipating us seeing any Protoss units that have more models in it than the Adepts. So, like you're already short on people, and thus the rate of attacks is going to be slightly smaller just by virtue of the fact that you don't have as many bodies. And every time you lose a body, it's going to affect your ROA far more than it does, say, like a Marine or a Zergling. So, so there's that. Um, it is a really great late round deploy unit, which is kind of nice. And this is one of the things that we don't really talk about that much is that when you're bringing units on either turn one or early on in the match when you're not entirely sure what is where, saving these guys off until really late in the deployment order is a really good idea because if you primarily brought them to stop people's marauders or their medics or their vile roaches or something like that, you don't want to deploy them to one side of the objectives where the enemy is not there, right, that you can effectively counter. So, wait until you see those things start coming out. And then when you know where those are, say, okay, with the rest of my army, I'm also going to move these sentries over. And the sentries are going to help me to do the job, right? It's also kind of your best access to evade saves because you don't really get easy access to evade saves on Protoss. Zealots and Adepts and Artanis do have a 5+, which is better than things like Stalkers, for example, let alone other sentries. With the 6+, I'm not sure handing out evade saves is going to help very much with Stalkers or Sentries, for that matter. They will be fine for things like Adepts and Zealots. But again, like, yeah, I think depending on what you want, I think that these could be pretty good, right? I mean, it all depends. For some people, they may be like, dude, this unit is so boss. It looks so cool. And it does. And so because I'm going to buy a couple of extras and more power to you. Because I ended up buying 2 starter armies, I decided just to pass for now. And I figure worst case scenario, I'll pick up some from my friendly local game store, right? So I'm not too concerned about it. But what do you think? Do you think that the Sentry is underpowered? That because of the fact that again, Protoss aren't going to have that many units like they all do need to be contributing all around, and this thing should get a bump up. Do you think this thing is actually too powerful as it is? That it's covering way too much, and that it even has a reaction that helps to preserve its friends that costs 0 psionic energy, which is extremely rare for other armies? Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.